So, good morning, everybody. And this morning, I'd like to welcome Iryna to our interview slot. So, Iryna, let's start by you introducing yourself to the watchers and listeners, please.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, I'm a product manager and I work with startups, mainly tech startups, and I help them develop their products from an idea to a live product. And actually, I help them build the products which customers really need, because that's one of the reasons why startups fail.
Fantastic. So, you're a relatively new business, I believe. So when did you start the business, and what was really the inspiration to set up on your own? That can be quite a scary thing to do. So,
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, I started this February, so just 4 months ago. Yeah, and basically this idea came from my experience, from my first experience when I set up my first business. I was a teacher. I wasn't a businesswoman, and I lacked some knowledge, and I made some mistakes. And basically, the biggest mistake was that my business model wasn't scalable.
okay.
And I just felt stuck, and I had no one to advise me. I had no one who told me this is not the right thing, try to do this. And when I started also volunteering for an organization that supports young entrepreneurs, students entrepreneurs, and when I met my mentee, I thought like, oh my God, this is me 10 years ago. So they had exactly the same questions which I had when I just started. And yeah, I thought, why not to start my own business and help other startups, just like I did when I was working for a company.
So, tell us a little bit about how the process works when you start working with a new client. What's the first thing that happens, and then how does that take the ideation through to actually being something real and out there?
First we start with a discovery meeting. That's like informal call or meeting where we talk about their business, their challenges, and trying to identify the right problem we want to solve. Because again, the main mistake which all entrepreneurs do is falling into solutions right away rather than finding the right problem worth solving. And when you start your business, also like you think about the solutions, like I can do this, I can do that, but what is the problem that you're solving for your clients and in general in your business? So yeah, the first meeting is about identifying the problem which we need to solve in your business. And then it depends on the scale, like how big is this problem. It can be short-term project or long-term project. So yeah, for example, it can be just a couple of workshops, specifically focusing on competitive strategy, let's say. Or it can be longer partnerships for half a year where we trying to test your business ideas, trying to minimize risks to launch a new product or service.
Okay, fantastic. And then within that, you talked about the fact that what's the problem trying to be solved, but what's the within your target market, what's the trigger for them to be looking for a solution? So if we think about when we're marketing to people, there are 5 levels of awareness. The first one is they don't know they've got a problem. Not a good place to market to. The highest one is that they've got a problem. They know you're the solution, and they're ready to have a conversation. But what's the principal pain point that makes them think, I need to book the discovery call, or I need to find somebody? There's a thing that's a catalyst to people actually taking action. So for your target market, what is that catalyst?
Yeah, it can be several. Basically, it can be chaos inside the team. For example, founder, like one of my current clients, the founder doesn't know how to organize the processes inside the team, how to make them more efficient, and how to make the delivery faster. Or it can be a lot of founders come up with an idea from their personal experience, like they want to develop a product because they had this problem
Yeah.
earlier. Yeah. Yeah, they are so focused on their idea, they're so obsessed with their idea, but they feel stuck that they can't find clients. So that's again where I can help and test actually business ideas before you invest a lot in building this product. So yeah, and we also had a conversation with one of the founders. He had an idea and he thought that this can be profitable. But I'm a big fan of evidence-based approach. I asked, like, how do you know this will be profitable? Like, what evidence do you have? And basically he didn't have any evidence. So I said, like, let's not invest in this. Try to find some evidence that this will work. Let's minimize your risks. And yeah, I think it was around £70,000 we saved.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, cool. I know you mentioned when we were at Zatch the other day that you'd just gone international with having a new client in the States. So thinking about the different cultures, I mean, even within the UK, you're going to be dealing with different cultures because we're such a wonderfully diverse communities and things these days. How do you manage the culture change between the different clients that you might be working with, the different target markets? Because the messaging might be different, the language patterns might be different.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And that's also one of the biggest struggles probably for businesses. Speaking about cultures I worked with, I would say that it's important to be open-minded, to appreciate the difference that every culture has their own peculiarities, even in terms of schedule. For example, when I worked with a team from Pakistan, we didn't schedule any calls on Friday because they have prayers and like for them it's not very convenient, and we appreciated that. So we created a culture like no calls, no meetings on Friday for everyone. And that just it creates sense of belonging of another culture for another team member from different culture, so they feel that they are not like different, or they feel that they fit any culture basically. So yeah, just be aware of the differences, be open-minded, and appreciate that.
So if you got a client with from a part of the world that, or even if they lived in the UK from a historic part of the world that was completely new to you, how do you approach figuring out what the cultural differences might be?
Probably the first thing I would do is just Google, like what are the traditions, the business culture in that country. And yeah, I would also ask people if I have someone who worked with this culture before. So yeah, just to be aware of some specific which you can't Google.
Well,
Yeah, just seeking advice.
We've got to be a bit careful about the quality that Google's bringing back as well, because it's not
Yeah,
it's not always as accurate as we might want it to be, I guess, is the real.
yeah.
So in terms of what you've done so far, what's the most exciting project that you've worked on so far, or that is about to come up?
Mm-hmm. Well, if we're speaking about technical side, the most exciting project or product was AI-powered application in health tech.
Oh, okay.
So we implemented AI feature in a mobile application, and we had also wearable device. So this application with wearable device helps to track recovery process for people who had some injuries, like knee injury. So that was really exciting, and we had really tight deadline, a month and a half to deliver this feature. We knew nothing about AI at that time, so it was a lot of research, a lot of assumption mapping, testing the ideas, getting feedback from customers, from investors, potential investors, from all stakeholders. So this was really exciting and challenging. And in terms of working with teams, team leadership is one of the topic which I'm really excited about. So in terms of working with teams, currently I work with American startup, and It's really interesting how we can organize the working process, because the team is not only from the USA, but from different countries, Europe, India, UK, and we're all in different time zones.
Yeah,
And we had
yeah. In my previous life,
yeah.
I ran global projects, and I had teams across the world. So yeah, I get the time differences piece definitely.
Yeah, and we all have different personalities, so that's also an important thing which you need to consider, how to work, how to make a team when you have such different personalities.
So just to wrap up before we open the floor to see if anybody else has got any questions. So what's the biggest thing you've learned since starting the business in February?
Oh, I think I need a big piece of paper to list all the things I learned so far. Yeah,
What's the one that
probably, yeah, the most important is how business works in the UK in general. Probably that's more about like marketing and getting out of your comfort zone, because we have different perceptions, we have different habits, lifestyles in different countries. So the marketing, how you market your business is also different. I just learned that you need to talk to as many people as possible, getting this feedback, just to adjust your style, communication style of marketing to the audience.
Fantastic. Thanks, Iryna. Has anybody got any questions for Iryna? If you want to unmute yourself and ask them, that would be fantastic.
I've just got a question. We find quite a lot of discussion and work has to go into the balance between culture of innovation and process of innovation. So, you know, a business who's thinking creatively, who's looking actively, you know, will have ideas, and then needs to a degree a process to actually get those ideas into play and into an organized way. And you need a balance in an organization of that culture and the process, because if you don't have the culture, then you have all the best process in the world, but if nobody's coming up with the bright ideas, then it's a bit of a struggle. And vice versa, if you don't have the process sitting behind the culture, then the bright ideas sort of become a random journey through a very erratic business profile until you either do or don't by some good fluke chance make it. Do you find in when you're working with a business in that product development side of things, do you find a tension between those two, or does it work well, or do you get any insight into that with the businesses you're working with?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of companies, they don't have this culture of innovation, or probably they don't know how to set up it. And I've had this issue when some people, like when you have meetings, you try to solve some problems. You need to be innovative, but some people just don't participate in these discussions unless they are asked for their opinion. It comes to building this culture of being open, to trust each other, and not being afraid of making mistakes, because quite a lot of people, they're just afraid of making mistakes. That's why they don't say anything, they don't come up with any ideas. First of all, I would say that you need to make sure that your environment is not toxic, and you appreciate this openness, you build this trust, and you don't shame your employees, your team members for the mistakes. So being bold and blunt is really important.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Some cultures do.
And do you find, obviously, when you're working across all the different cultures, you know, we know in the UK that equality and inclusion is significant, and whether you're talking there about racial or gender or whatever, and it's at the very least an open discussion, whether or not you view it as an open, you know, as something that's healthy or not, and that's going to alter business to business. But, you know, different cultures around the world are very different. Do you see that? I'm related back to that culture. You know, a culture of innovation needs people to be willing to challenge the existing and say, why do I do that? And there's a business in Gloucestershire that's, you know, when it's talking about this culture of innovation is really important. We'll talk to our our guys cleaning the floors in the bathrooms, that if the bin is in the wrong place, tell us the bin is in the wrong place, because we'll move the bin and you'll be more efficient. And that is their way of demonstrating a culture of innovation that goes right through from the janitor through to the CEO. Now, that's fine, but if you don't have an equal and inclusive approach as well, then obviously there's only a part of the workforce that's actually joining into that conversation in an open way. Again, do you see that as a cultural difference in the different businesses around the world you're dealing with?
Yeah, that's also the case. But again, I would say it's also about like team building. I used to have some every Friday we used to have some team building activities, but that's not like going out and playing tennis. That's about building this trust and inclusive environment for people from different cultural background. So that was different activities, and the main goal was to get to know each other in more informal way, like different habits, hobbies, style of communication, style of working, and that was really helpful because even the most reserved people in the team, they feel less embarrassed of saying something. They can be excellent employees, they can be excellent developers, but they are very reserved and shy, and they don't talk about their ideas unless they're asked. So just to include everyone into conversation and driving these conversations, that's the main point.
Excellent. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Iryna.
So our second interview today is with Nick Cramp. Now, Nick and I met each other, I think, probably a couple of weeks ago, and we were just exploring a little bit of what business is, what he's involved in, what he's doing. And Nick's a business mentor and a business coach, but he's got a couple of quite interesting dynamics going on in the business, which we're going to talk about this morning. But Nick, before we get into that, can you just introduce yourself? Say hello, introduce with a little bit more depth, maybe exactly who you are, what the business is that you do, and then we'll kind of take it from there. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. My career is kind of two halves. I spent the first 15 years of my life as business owner. So I ran a health club and I ran a preschool and nursery. So I was fortunate to be able to buy a business when I was quite young. And I spent 15 years working out how not to run a business and learning on the job. Lots of mistakes, lots of learnings. And then 2008, I pivoted, sold one business, closed the other business, and started business coaching. So realized my real passion was working with others, developing their business, and just developed a coaching practice over the last 15 years, working primarily now with adolescent stage businesses. So these are our established businesses, 10 plus employees that are, well established, but aren't quite where the owner founder wants them to be yet. So I'm working with the owner founder on creating a better business. And the name of my company is Better Before Bigger, which is my kind of philosophy that a lot of people focus on creating a bigger business, but not enough time on a better business. So better for me is better profits, better employee relationships, better services and clients and products. So really considering what they've currently got and trying to improve it rather than just growing for growth's sake.
No, that's really interesting. And I can certainly relate to that. It's interesting to hear you put into words those of us who've been around in business in one shape or form and through a couple of different iterations for a while and have lived through a couple of recessions and a couple of good points and a couple of bad points. We'll all relate back to the fact that we've all made the mistake, we've all been there, we've all been a part of somebody else's mistake, we've all been a casualty, we've all been a benefit of things that have happened. And as you live through it at the time, you don't really appreciate it necessarily at the time. It's only when you look back and you're doing something else, you go, you know what happened there? That was really important. It wasn't necessarily good, but it was really important, and actually you can take that forward. So the ability then to apply that is great, you know, because that's life experience, and life experience versus youthful creativity is one of the famous trade-offs that we find on discussion all the time. You know, we have young people who are entering a space with great ideas, digital nativity, you know, a whole new culture that we haven't grown up with, versus people who've been there and got the t-shirt and made the mistakes and going, oh my word, and actually matching off those two cultures.
Yeah.
I would say is one of the challenges of our age, bluntly, but it's probably been the challenge of every age. It's just I think we're more aware of it, even if we don't always express it in that way. So we're going to focus a little bit on young people and young people in business today. And I'm just interested when it comes to young people and their view on business here in 2024. What's your view of their view of business in 2024?
I think that, I mean, a lot of the time I spend is with business owners that are 40 plus probably in profile and age. So I think the biggest challenge for both sides of the equation is understanding the other side. I think that there's a generational gap sometimes appears in businesses because they don't spend enough time with young people and understand the working environment that young people actually will thrive in. And I think there's an obligation for business owners and founders to consider that much more so. And I think that it's really understanding the environment that will allow others to thrive across generations. And I think young people sometimes feel they don't understand the business environment, the business workplace, because their experience or their lived experience has been through COVID and a lot of this kind of Zoom meetings. And that for my generation of business owners is only a new thing. And we've had the benefit of spending time in the office with other people and learning alongside others in a very practical environment. And I think that's where the challenge is right now for connecting the two.
Yes, and I want to pick up on something you said there, which I don't know whether it struck a chord or it just struck me to explore a bit. What you said there is young people and the environment they will thrive in, and I, in my mind, instantly think, yes, okay, I get that, and that's right. Thrive in versus the environment they want. So actually, what we're doing is we're making or taking a call there from experience, saying actually you work well in that environment, and the backdrop to that statement is I'm making a call in my experience that I think will work for you, versus this is the environment you want to work in, which is that. Now I'm just interested to pull on that thread for a moment and just see how you see that balance, the want to versus this will work for you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Peter. I think that it's kind of meeting people halfway. I think that young people, won't always know what's had experience of different environments. They haven't got the benefit of that to understand where best they work. And I think that for different types of businesses, it works differently. For some of the businesses I coach, straight after COVID, they brought everyone back in the office. And that for them was a really good move because the type of business they were, where there was lots of collaboration needed, it was so much easier to do in the physical space than it was virtually. So I think it is not one size fits all, but I think there has to be a conversation around what's best for the business and what's best for the individual, and trying to balance those two competing needs sometimes, and it depends on the working environment at home. There's lots of my clients have still got quite senior people working on the dining room table.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel like a healthy way to run a sustainable business.
No, and there's a danger we could get into a whole new, we're working on a piece of work at the moment with UE, which is called The Future of Work and the Future of Employment. Actually, we're hoping to see that roll out at the South Gloucestershire show that we're doing in November. And while I don't want to get distracted into whole differentials on this conversation about workplaces and the good and bad and the ugly, because that's a fascinating area in its own right.
Yeah.
It does apply to this because, of course, as you rightly say, young people are experiencing some things. It's slightly stunning but true. A young person who's working in an office full of open plan people and a water cooler and team dynamic may be experiencing that as a new experience.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just takes a moment to go, hang on a minute, yes, that's a new experience for you. So I know I'm loving it, and it's great. So listen, let's move this forward a little bit, because that's just exploring some of this psychology, emotional intelligence about the differential between the likes of us who've been around a year or two and those who are just coming to the workplace for the first time and experiences. I think you've taken on a coach to work with business leaders and businesses to create places that are more aligned with young people. Now that's quite an interesting proactive action on this subject matter. So I'm fascinated. Tell us about what you're doing there.
Yeah, I've taken on a coach who's 25 years younger than me, because I think that the workplace, she has a different view of workplace. She has a different view of organizations. And I think that she can engage different conversations with my clients than the ones I'm having with the founders. So I think it's about that conversation, about the understanding of the mindset of the different generations that exist within the workplace, and making sure that everybody's got a voice and that the views of others are being heard, and there is that kind of channel and the confidence to have those open conversations around the difficult subjects. And I think that the future workplace, without deviating too far, is going to be a flatter structure. I think there should be more open discussion, and I think that's a healthy workplace going forward, because you're combining the best of everything.
So this plays a little bit into the discussion we were having earlier with Iryna, of course, and actually open culture.
Yeah, and I think the culture thing is the bit that I spend more time with my clients on than maybe I imagined I would.
Yeah.
Thinking about the culture and being conscious of the culture they're creating. And the coach I brought in is going to be facilitating workshops. They're going to be generating kind of interactions and making sure there's a healthy interaction, a healthy culture, healthy kind of tools and channels and avenues and stuff like that for discussions, so that, as Iryna was talking about, you get this flow of conversation within the business.
So I'm interested, how much, I mean, obviously you brought someone new. I realise I don't actually, what's the timescale? Did you start last week or did she start a year ago?
She started 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, fine. So we're in a really new phase of this. So I'm interested what your perception of the answer to this next question is, and what maybe you're seeing you now. How difficult, what are the challenges of actually achieving this? Is this a kind of welcome piece that you're going into workplaces and they're going, yes, actually, let's get on with this, and what do we do? Or are you going in with a slight sense of, here's the crowbar, let's get under the skin of this? Yeah, I know you don't want to, but it's important. How's that balance fit?
It's come about because of conversations with founders and business owners about their lack of understanding of what the next generation needs. So they're feeling sometimes quite frustrated that what they think should land well with that generation isn't landing.
Yeah.
That's a gap of understanding which they've identified, but they don't really know what conversations to have or what questions to ask or how to engage in that way.
Yeah, so we're back into this, trying to make judgment calls on behalf of a younger generation through the lens of an older generation, and that's
Absolutely.
going to be difficult. I mean,
yeah,
you only have to look at politics today to go, okay, there it is, in a box with a ribbon tied on it. No, I get it, and that's really interesting. And do you have any sort of aspiration timescale for sort of understanding move that if someone's been with you for 3 weeks and you're beginning to get into that, albeit a welcome invitation, how, when you look at this in 6 months' time or in a year's time, do you have any feel now for what you'll be looking at?
Yeah, I think we'll be looking at having coaching and developing leadership as a theme across these businesses, where we're developing leaders far earlier in their career cycle.
Yeah.
So rather than leadership being a position people aspire to when they're 30, 40, creating opportunities for leadership far earlier.
Yeah.
And having that at a multi-level across organizations.
No, great. And I don't want to distract our thread now, but I'm fascinated. We've got Louis in India here by sheer freak of chance, who are working with young people in the Bristol area. So when we get to that magic moment later, I would say, I'm really interested to hear from you two about what your sort of thought on this is. But I'm not going to go there now because we've got a few questions to go on. But I just like, that would be good. Listen, let's change tack a little bit here.
Yeah.
Social value, climate, ethics, good practice in business, B Corp.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff going on in the business world at the moment that is around doing better business. I'm noting the name of your business.
Yeah.
Business. Now, I also note from your explanation of that, you're not necessarily going into the value space, you're going into the level, etc. I get that. But when we talk about young people and we talk about their attitude to business, I would say, without having scientific backup to it, but generally I get the sense that young people today are far more focused on those social value, climate, environment, sustainability aspects. How do you see that playing into their thinking? How do you address that in your thinking as you work with your new coach to create those workspaces?
Yeah, it's a really relevant topic right now, and I think that it's got to be thought through all the way through the business. So I think it starts on the onboarding process, and I think that there's a lot more expectation from young people to have a conversation about the purpose of the business, the values, the ambitions, the environment, the culture, even before they get on to what the role's going to be. It's like almost reversing the interview process and say, right, at the start, are we a good match value-wise? Do you share our vision? And having that conversation on the way in, making sure that the organization is right for them and they're right for the organization. On my side, it's coaching my clients to have that in place, to be comfortable talking about the purpose and the values and the promises and the principles and all of that soft stuff, because I think that's the mutual ground that will engage young people. If they're engaged on that level, then helping them acquire the hard skills is probably the easier bit. So I think it's trying to flip what we would traditionally do in terms of onboarding, and then making sure that those conversations stay central all the way through the business. So the session I ran yesterday with a client was all about, the core of their business, their purpose, their promises and their principles, and whether everyone was feeling it and whether all the employees across the organization felt connected with those. And we spent 3 hours just looking at that in small groups and discussions. So that's how I'm trying to kind of help businesses connect across generations.
So the picture we're beginning to see here is one of two halves in this conversation. The one half is the young person, typically or atypically, as they arrive at a point when they're developing career, or the point where they're engaging conversations, and then the other half being the business who's got to align themselves to a place where they're receiving that. Now, obviously, you're working on the second half of that equation. The first half of that equation, we see quite a bit of feedback about young people being ready for the workplace, and that feedback comes from recruitment companies. It comes from people who are, trying new stuff, and the critical side of it is young people and their soft skills. And there's an argument that says maybe the national curriculum, while fine insofar as it goes, what it's not doing is it's preparing people for the place of work. It might be preparing them technically to do a subject matter, but is it actually preparing them to work in a workplace? And you quite quickly move on to, so what is that workplace? And then again, we're not going to allow ourselves to be distracted here. But the work you're doing is actually with the workplace, and saying, how do you engineer an environment and a culture which is actually going to be receptive to and attractive to young people? So what's your, you're 3 weeks in with a new coach and you're on a brand new idea. So you're not going to come up with concrete answer to that. I get it. And I think if you did, we'd probably all go, that's not the approach. But what do you see from where you are now in terms of that work?
I think the work is around simply having conversations and creating that safe space within the working environment where everybody can feed back. So this concept of psychological safety and being able to express an opinion and not be judged negatively, for ideas and expressions. And I think the psychological safety in organizations is really important, and creating a space where everyone feels their voice is heard. So the work we're doing is putting that in place and making it the norm and making it kind of part of the culture that there is, as Iryna was talking about, this regular get together. And as you're talking about the product development, working on the soft side, because the soft side for me always precedes the hard side. Get the outcome and the results if you created the right culture. So I think the work is around making culture very visible within an organization, but very accessible. So that you're consciously having conversations around that rather than just prioritizing the outputs and the kind of the hard metrics. It's going there on the softer stuff.
So it's interesting, and that word, psychological safety, two words that you don't often hear directly connected in a business communication. They do sit into the world of emotional intelligence. They do sit in the world of safeguarding and things like that. But the psychological safety space, which is a softer side, maybe not surrounding it with the safeguarding rules so much, but actually creating culture that means it is a safe space. Yes, absolutely. I see that. We are back into culture. We were talking about culture a moment ago. Culture sits across so much, and you're only 3 weeks into this. You're therefore going to be looking at it in a perspective. But instantly, I'm thinking, gosh, great. What if you were dealing with an organization sat in the States, or an organization sat in South Africa, or an organization sat in India, or those cultures, those geographically based cultures, of course, would be into this as well. But again, let's not get distracted, because it's a fascinating subject, just even with our own culture. And I guess we need to look at home first and understand what we're thinking about there. But at some point in the future, great place to go with the discussion. Listen, is the sector, so can you see that we've got a range of sectors, and lots of different things, and the government, for better or worse, rightly or wrongly, will put in a lot of value to STEM. And sorry, I'm not making that sound like I disagree with that. STEM is really important, and science, engineering, and maths, and all that stuff. I guess the question that sits just below that is, where do the arts sit in that conversation? And there's fairly well established principle for those involved in innovation dialogue. The arts are absolutely critical to innovation, because if you take the arts and creative thinking out of innovation, you just end up with technical drawing. Okay, that's a bit simplistic, but you know what I mean. You need creativity in that culture. Social sciences, that what we're talking about here, how do I engage? Understanding psychology and NLP stuff, at a scientific level, is all important. Do you see this? There are sectors that actually can get real wins from young people. Do you see sectors where it's difficult? Do you see sectors where it's actually fairly straightforward? Agriculture is a really fascinating sector with this dynamic, because heavily family businesses. You get someone who's past retirement age wondering whether they're going to hand off to a younger generation and not really wanting to. How do you see that, and what do you see the challenges across those different sectors and areas?
I don't think too many differences between the sectors. I think the challenge is the similar. I think the key is around apprenticeships. It's around kind of engaging much earlier in the cycle. So kind of collaborating with schools and colleges, organization, like the guys are on here from today, those partnerships early on I think is the key, whatever the sector is. So I think that, again, there's an obligation on businesses and business owners to reach back and to give back to society locally to where they are and create those relationships. I think that's the key. I think that if we wait for government to do it, they're just, that's passing it backwards for me. I think that these are successful businesses and they have an obligation socially to build links and to foster relationships which allow a smoother transition from education into workplaces. I think if the government do something on top of that, great. But I don't think it's the government's role primarily to do this because these are private businesses. These are, individuals that are making their own money and they've got a choice of what to do with it.
Yeah, interesting. And that leads me to a final question here, but then we're going to open it up and I'm interested to hear other people's views on this. But it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but maybe not so much so. We're sat here in, we're in June 2024. We're in the middle of an election campaign, if anybody has missed that going on around them. And I'm guessing if you had a clear run and you were able to say to the politicians involved in the dialogue and the elections, relevant to getting a younger dynamic engaged in a business workplace, what would your simple message or question to them be?
I would encourage them to set up community workspaces which are free of charge. I think that co-working and being in a working environment alongside others, whether it's others from the same company or different companies, but I think there's quite a lot of empty spaces, retail spaces in town centres and city centres, which if they were converted into open working spaces. So the idea with Starbucks was going to be this third space where people would go and socialize away from work. And I think there's such a gap at the moment because companies are still staying virtual, but they need to be more physical at times. And I think having community spaces where a company could just hire a space for a day and get all of its team together, I would encourage councils to reinvest in that kind of opportunity.
Which is a great high street discussion as well as a culture and community business discussion. And again, let's not get distracted into another really important area. But no, that's interesting. And again, we're looking at their culture and getting people interacting, aren't we, in psychological spaces and all the rest of it. Okay, so that's covered an awful lot of ground. Thank you. I'm absolutely fascinated to throw this open. I guess, as I said, I'm sure India and Lewis we'll have some thoughts on that, and I'm interested to get your take on it. You're working with the young people, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. But anybody who's got any questions or comments for Nick, feel free. Over to you guys, really. Dive in.
Hey, I've got a question which is slightly tangential, Nick. I mean, one of the things that's happening certainly with a lot of the youngsters, but I do know a couple of slightly older people that have done it, is this whole idea of running or earning your money through being a digital nomad. So you don't, because you can work remotely from all over the world.
Yeah.
Is there some way for companies to think about how they use the youngsters' expertise that's wanting to work in that space rather than being in the office? Because of course their community is the digital nomad community, and wherever they're staying, as co-working spaces, so they're working with lots of different people from different backgrounds and maybe staying there 3 months or whatever. What's your thoughts on how that two pieces might be brought together?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because I think there's a lot of skills and expertise out there if you can find a way to engage with that community. So I think, again, it's having the conversations around, how that merges into your culture and into your company, and whether it's kind of outsourcing on a freelance basis, something more permanent. I think it's a really missed opportunity if they don't do that and they don't think about how that, as you say, it's almost like this other community, isn't it? How this other community could benefit and what that collaboration could look like. So I think the whole freelance online, the Fiverr and all that kind of opportunity is massive. And it's such a win-win situation if you get it right.
Yeah, I suppose some of that is actually getting that onto larger companies' radar as even being a place to think about. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's a danger of being very traditional, I guess, in terms of how companies look for resource.
Absolutely. It's another resource pool, isn't it? As you say, that's sitting there that they could take advantage of if they get their mindset right.
And I think one of the things for them to think about is that it's not only youngsters that are doing
Oh,
it; it's very experienced people that are doing it. So,
yeah. Yeah, it's a really valid point.
thanks, Nick.
Anyone else want to lob anything into the equation for the discussion? No?
I was just going to ask a quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So I think, Nick, you touched on it briefly when you were just explaining it before, and you kind of talked about this idea of young people kind of being valued in the workplace. And I think that's something that's really quite important for young people, because the way that I see it, there seems to be a slight disconnect in between the kind of the younger generation, the older generation, where younger generation almost sometimes feels that they're undervalued at workplaces compared to those that are senior to them in age. Have you got an idea maybe about how people can kind of engage young people, make them feel more valued in the workplace, and how they can feel as though they're just an important part of the team as everybody else?
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, and I think it comes down to setting expectations on day one as to the length of time it might take for someone to be embedded in the workplace.
Mhm.
I'm not a big fan of like 3-month probations, because I think 3 months is a really short period, particularly if you're meeting people virtually most of the time, to establish relationships and really understand even what's going on. So I think there's, again, onus on both sides, onus on the young person to really understand the organizational and to push for opportunities to get involved. But also on the flip side, the organization really understanding the skill set that person's got. For me, I use young people in freelance capacities quite a lot because my digital skills are pants and their digital skills are very good. So why would I, fluster over something when I can just outsource it to someone that can do it whilst doing 17 other tasks far better than I can? So I think there's an onus on day one to say, right, how do I get this person comfortable in the workplace? And what's the best way to do that? And then later on, look at what the workplace needs. So I think the young person needs to be maybe a little bit more work ready. And I know that's the work you guys are doing. But I think the onus is generally on the senior partner, i.e. the work environment, to accommodate that person. And if they're a good values fit, why would you not take 6-12 months to really develop them and just take a bit of time building the relationship, rather than saying, right, after 3 months, you've got to have done this, otherwise it's not going to continue. That just seems too harsh.
Mm.
Hmm.
Absolutely. So, and as you were saying, something that we kind of work on at Young Bristol is that we have this project that we call the Outdoor Employment Program, where we take 16 and 17-year-olds and kind of put them through this program to give them a certificate in being able to train and coach outdoor activities.
Yeah.
That's a really important part of what we do. But have you seen in business maybe where young people are kind of lacking? Is there any skills that you've seen that they've come in and there's something like in particular that they're not really coping with in the workplace, or something that you think they need more work on?
I think the work, and it's totally understandable, is around their confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I think that because they've gone through COVID and because they've gone through a lot of stuff where we have become isolated, then they sometimes lack the confidence to actually have adult conversations and actually adopt that. So I think that the confidence and the mentoring around that, what that looks like, receiving difficult feedback is part of being in the workplace, and giving them a bit more resilience around that that's okay. If someone points out something you could have done better, it's not a criticism. So I think building their resilience is really important, because I think that's the bit that gets lost sometimes, that they probably need to be 30% more resilient to survive the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd like to add, if you don't mind, I absolutely agree with Nick regarding the feedback. And I also I'd add that you need to provide a bit more specific feedback, because I recently had a conversation with a young professional, and she didn't know like what it means when they say like you need to be more proactive. We expect you to be proactive, but what exactly it means being proactive, and how you expect your young employee to be proactive, and which resources you provide to them, because just to say that you need to do this is not enough. How you can assist, and also be careful with language, like how do you say that? Do you provide help, assistance, resources? So yeah, that's also very important points to consider.
Language, skills, culture, yeah, absolutely. Gosh, guys, thank you so much. We've sort of hit the moment where I know I'm going to get nudged by Jill in a minute to keep moving because we're on our timeline. But what I would say is, having had a couple of brief conversations with Nick around this, and part of the inspiration by inviting Nick on this morning is getting younger people involved in workplaces has been over the years when we plan the programming for the shows, and that sort of thought leadership side of things, something that's been a recurring theme which we've wanted to tackle and not necessarily had the right set of tools. And I put a little bit of challenge in Nick's world a couple of weeks ago and said, look, that is something which we would absolutely want to develop some programming time for going forward. So I'm not quite sure where this is going or what that looks like, but this has been really interesting to just explore that space a little bit and get some feeling. And I think I'm reasonably confident that we will, as we move forward, start seeing something from this appear in the show in a dedicated thread line. Whether that'll happen as early as November in South Gloucestershire or what, I wouldn't like to say at the moment. But I think if any of you would like to contribute to that conversation, I keep it as simple as that at the moment, then do let us know, because we run panel discussions and forums. What we don't want to do is stand up and preach and say this is how it should be, because none of us are solely qualified to do that. But actually, if we can get a discussion about this very important space up and running, that's what we're trying to achieve. So Nick, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you, Iryna. And I'm going to say, Jill, we're back with you now, I think.